There is a road on Long Island that the earliest settlers refused to name after anything beautiful. They called it what it was. They called it misery. And 300 years later, nothing about that has changed. Mount Misery Road sits in the town of Huntington, Suffolk County, Long Island, New York, technically passing through the quiet suburban community of Melville. On a map, it looks innocent enough, a thin line cutting through a stretch of preserved woodland sandwiched between West Hills County Park and the Northern State Parkway. It is surrounded on all sides by the kind of peaceful suburban landscape that Long Island is known for. Manicured lawns, leafy neighborhoods, soccer fields. But the moment you turn off the main road and your headlights illuminate the first canopy of black, gnarled trees that close in above you, you understand immediately why the people who first walked this ground named it the way they did. This is not just a haunted road. This is a place that has been wrong for centuries. The name itself is not romantic. It is not the invention of some horror enthusiast looking to give a road an eerie identity. When the earliest European colonists pushed into the West Hills of Long Island in the 1600s, they encountered a stretch of rocky, uneven terrain that was impossible to farm, nearly impassable to cross, and strangely resistant to any form of human settlement. The ground was too rocky, the hills too steep, the soil too thin. Every attempt to work the land was met with failure. Draft animals struggled on the uneven slopes, wagon wheels cracked on the stones. The settlers, hardy men and women who had survived ocean crossings and frontier hardship, looked at this stretch of wilderness and had only one word for it: miserable. The name stuck, and it stuck for a reason. But before the colonists ever arrived, long before a single European foot ever touched this soil, the indigenous Manetto people, whose very name is preserved in the alternate name for these hills, Manetto Hills, regarded Mount Misery as no man's land. They spoke of strange lights that appeared on the hilltops at night, lights that moved without source and vanished without explanation. They spoke of livestock that wandered onto the slopes and were never seen again. They spoke of creatures in the woods that were neither animal nor spirit, things that moved between the trees with a silence that made the air feel wrong. The indigenous Manetto people did not build on Mount Misery. They did not camp here. They did not hunt here. When the land was eventually sold to early colonists, the indigenous people who negotiated the sale reportedly warned the new owners about the evil spirits that called this place home. The settlers laughed. They were practical people. They did not believe in spirits. They believed in land and labor and God. And then, one by one, they began to understand. Imagine driving here alone. It is past midnight. The road is narrow, barely wide enough for two cars to pass each other comfortably. On either side of you, the trees press in close, their branches interlocked overhead like fingers lacing together, blocking out the sky. There is no streetlight here, no convenience store glowing in the distance, no reassuring signs of suburban life. Just your headlights, a strip of cracked asphalt, and the darkness. The darkness is not passive here. People who have driven this road at night consistently describe the same sensation, the feeling that the dark itself is watching you, that something on the other side of those trees knows you are here and it is waiting. This is not a new sensation. It has been reported for generations, and one man, one of the most famous paranormal investigators of the 20th century, knew exactly what that feeling meant. In 1967, journalist and researcher John Keel was in the middle of the investigation that would define his career. He was chasing the Mothman in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, documenting a series of events so bizarre and so disturbing that they would eventually become the basis for one of the most famous supernatural books ever written. But in the midst of that investigation, Keel received reports of something happening in Long Island. Something was taking place on Mount Misery Road that mirrored the high strangeness events occurring in West Virginia. UFOs tracked across the sky above the West Hills. Witnesses reported being followed by vehicles that vanished. Men in dark suits knocked on doors and asked questions that made no sense. Strange lights descended into the tree line and did not come back up. John Keel came to Mount Misery Road. He documented what he found, and he wrote about it in the Mothman Prophecies, describing Mount Misery as a place of concentrated supernatural activity, a location where the boundary between our world and something else had become dangerously thin. When a researcher who has spent his life cataloging the world's most terrifying paranormal events tells you that a road in Long Island frightened you, you pay attention. But the UFOs and the men in black are only the surface layer of what makes this road dangerous, because beneath the modern legends, beneath the urban folklore that teenagers share in school hallways and online forums, there is something older here. Something that predates the colonists and the Native Americans both. Something that has been here since the beginning, patient, watchful, and deeply, profoundly dark. And the deeper you drive into the West Hills, the closer you get to the heart of it. Keep your windows rolled up, keep your eyes on the road, and whatever you see moving between the trees, do not stop the car. There is a specific stretch of Mount Misery Road where the trees are oldest and the road curves most sharply, a bend that locals have been whispering about for nearly 200 years. It is the stretch closest to the intersection with Sweet Hollow Road, where the two haunted corridors of the West Hills converge at a crossroads that no one who knows this area will pass through alone after dark. Because it was here, according to the oldest living legends of Huntington, that the worst of what happened on this hill actually happened. Sometime between 1840 and 1851, the historical records are imprecise, perhaps deliberately so, a hospital was established near this crossroads. It was the kind of institution that the mid-19th century was quietly ashamed of, a facility for the mentally ill tucked away in the woods far from polite society, where the patients were hidden rather than healed. The building was remote by design. The woods kept the screams contained, the hills kept the curious away. For years, what happened inside those walls stayed inside those walls. The patients who entered rarely returned to the world outside, and the staff who worked there, who lived alongside those suffering, isolated souls deep in the West Hills, gradually began to change in ways that no one from town could quite articulate. And then, one night, the building burned. The fire was total. There was no fighting it. The structure was too remote, the flames too fast, and by the time anyone from the outside world became aware of what was happening, the asylum was gone. The patients went with it. The staff went with it. Everything went with it, except the screams, which witnesses on the road outside claimed they could hear even over the roar of the fire. Human voices crying out from inside a burning building that no one could reach. That sound, that specific, unbearable sound, is what people report hearing on Mount Misery Road to this day. On quiet nights, when the wind drops and the trees stop moving, drivers on this road have pulled over to listen to what they initially assumed was an animal in distress. They describe a low, sustained sound coming from deep within the forest. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream, something between the two, something that carries within it an unmistakable quality of suffering. Some have rolled down their windows to listen more closely. Most have immediately rolled them back up and driven away as fast as they could. Because accompanying the sound, and this is the detail that separates the curious from the truly disturbed, is a smell. The smell of burning. Not wood smoke, not a bonfire. The specific, distinctive, stomach-turning stench of burning human flesh, rising out of woods where no fire is visible from a building that has not existed for over a century and a half. The asylum was rebuilt approximately 15 years after the first fire, because that is what people did in the 19th century. They rebuilt, they tried again. They believed in order and in progress, and in the idea that if you simply persisted, you could make even a cursed piece of ground serve a civilized purpose. The new building stood for 5 months. 5 months. And then the fire came again. This time, legend assigns it a name, a patient, a woman they called Mary. Who was Mary? That depends entirely on who you ask and how far back you are willing to follow the story. The most documented version says she was a patient at the hospital who set the second fire deliberately, trapping everyone inside, destroying the building and every soul within it before vanishing into the surrounding woods. Whether she survived, whether she died in the flames herself, whether she was ever found, no one knows. But the figure that has been reported on Mount Misery Road and Sweet Hollow Road for the last century and a half bears her description precisely. A woman, dressed in white, veiled, walking the road alone at night, moving between the tree line and the shoulder, her head turning toward approaching headlights with a slowness that makes your blood go cold. Drivers who have encountered the lady in white, and there are many, spanning generations, their accounts documented by paranormal researchers across Long Island, describe the encounter in remarkably consistent terms. She appears suddenly, always near the crossroads, always in the dark. She does not walk the way a living person walks. Her movement is wrong in a way that is difficult to describe, but impossible to misinterpret. She does not respond to headlights. She does not react to the sound of an engine. She simply continues her slow, deliberate movement along the road, and then she turns toward you. And the moment she turns, drivers report an overwhelming urge to look away, not out of politeness, not out of surprise, out of fear, a deep, primal, animal terror that bypasses rational thought entirely and speaks directly to something old and wordless in the human brain. Some have looked anyway, some have described her face, or what they believe they saw of it through the veil. Every account ends the same way, with the driver accelerating, putting as much distance between themselves and the crossroads as possible, and refusing to return until daylight. But Mary is not the only reason people do not stop their cars near the crossroads after dark. There is also the question of what waits on the other side of the tree line. The woods on either side of this road have a quality at night that defies easy explanation. Experienced hikers who know West Hills County Park well during the day have described entering the same trails after dark and feeling immediately, completely wrong. Not frightened in the way you feel frightened by a sudden noise or an unexpected animal, wrong in the way you feel when something fundamental about your environment has shifted, when the air pressure changes, when the temperature drops without wind, when the silence becomes so total and so specific that it feels constructed rather than natural. Several paranormal investigators who have set up equipment in these woods after dark have captured audio anomalies they cannot account for. Voices where there should be no voices, sounds that do not correspond to any known species of animal, and, more than once, the unambiguous sound of something large moving through the undergrowth just beyond their range of lights, circling, patient, unhurried. That is only the beginning. Because what is waiting in those woods, what investigators and terrified late-night drivers have been encountering for decades, is not just the echo of a tragic fire or the ghost of a tormented woman. It is something that John Keel classified as a different category of entity entirely, and it is something you are about to meet. You are under the overpass now. The Northern State Parkway Bridge stretches above you, a concrete span that crosses Sweet Hollow Road in near-complete darkness, its underside wet and black even on dry nights, the sound of the occasional car passing overhead arriving as a low, muffled thunder. This overpass is one of the most documented haunted sites on all of Long Island. It is the kind of place that earns its reputation not through a single dramatic event, but through an accumulation of accounts, dozens of them, consistent, credible, spanning more than 50 years, that collectively paint a picture of something genuinely and deeply wrong. Here is what is said to have happened here. A school bus, carrying children home on an icy winter night, lost control on the approach to the overpass and crashed. The children died, all of them, or nearly all, depending on which version of the story you follow. They died here, on this road, under this bridge, in the cold and the dark and the silence. And since that night, they have never entirely left. The ritual is specific, and it is known to virtually every teenager who has grown up within 20 miles of this road. You drive under the overpass, you stop the car, you shift into neutral, you turn off your engine, you wait, and the car moves. Not dramatically, not violently, just a gentle, unmistakable forward push, as if small hands have pressed against your bumper and are guiding you forward, past the danger, through the darkness, out from under the bridge, and into the open road ahead. People have done this and reported feeling more than just movement. They have reported a pressure against the outside of the car, a weight they can feel through the frame and the door panels that is not the wind, because there is no wind, not vibration from passing traffic, because there is no traffic, just pressure. Small, deliberate, insistent. And afterward, when they get out of the car and examine the bumper and the hood and the trunk with their phone flashlights, some of them find fingerprints. Small fingerprints, child-sized, pressed into the dust and the grime on the metal, pointing forward in the direction the car was pushed. Whether this is a genuine supernatural event or an elaborate collective hallucination sustained by decades of shared expectation, there is no definitive answer. What can be said with certainty is that the accounts never stop. They continue to be reported. Young couples, groups of friends, lone investigators, all of them describing the same inexplicable push, the same eerie pressure, the same fingerprints in the dust. The children of Sweet Hollow Road have been waiting under that overpass for a very long time, and they are still waiting. But the overpass holds a second legend, darker than the first. In the 1970s, the exact year is disputed, a group of teenagers are said to have gathered on this bridge and made a pact. The details vary. Some say there were 3, some say 6, some say they were driven to it by something they had encountered on the road below, something they had seen or heard that left them unwilling or unable to live with what they knew. Whatever the reason, they were found hanging from the overpass. And it is their hands, some say, not the children from the bus, but these older, broken young people whose presence you feel when your car shifts in neutral beneath the bridge. Their guilt, their sorrow, their need to keep something moving forward that they themselves could not. What no one argues about is the figure that has been seen near the overpass on the road itself, the police officer. He appears without warning. He is in full uniform, the description never varies. He pulls you over with practiced authority, his flashlight scanning the interior of your car, his posture carrying the specific boredom of a traffic stop conducted 1,000 times. He asks for your license and registration. He takes them back to his vehicle. You watch him in your rearview mirror as he walks away, and that is when you see it, the back of his head. Or rather, where the back of his head should be. There is nothing there. The skull is open. There is only darkness where the occipital bone should be, and the suggestion of something wet and dark spreading across the collar of his uniform. He was shot from behind. He has been shot from behind, and he does not know it, or he knows it perfectly well and is showing you deliberately. He is still doing his job. He is still walking his beat. He is still pulling people over on the road that killed him. And if you are still sitting in your car when he reaches his vehicle and turns around to face you, the accounts of those who have stayed that long do not make comfortable reading. Take a breath, because we are not finished. In the same decade that John Keel was documenting the supernatural activity on Mount Misery Road, a parallel series of events was unfolding that no researcher has ever fully explained. UFOs, not lights in the sky, but structured craft, observed at close range by multiple witnesses, were repeatedly reported over the West Hills. People described them as silent, massive, and low, so low that witnesses standing on the road could see their undersides clearly. These sightings were not isolated. They occurred in clusters over a period of months, and they were accompanied by a secondary phenomenon that Keel had also documented in Point Pleasant: the men in black. Individuals in dark suits arriving in black vehicles, knocking on the doors of witnesses, asking detailed questions about what had been seen, and then departing without explanation, leaving the witnesses with a pervasive, inexplicable feeling of dread that sometimes lasted for days. The question Keel asked, the question that has never been answered, was whether the UFOs, the apparitions, the phantom animals, the ghost cop, and the lady in white were all separate phenomena, or whether they were all expressions of the same underlying force, whether the land itself was the source. Paranormal researcher Frank Edwards once described Mount Misery as, quote, a kind of supernatural volcano which periodically explodes to shower calamity and misfortune on all who venture near. Not a haunted house, not a haunted road, a haunted geography, an active zone of concentrated supernatural energy cycling through different forms of manifestation across different decades, always keeping pace with the fears of the people who live near it. That description is no more apt than it is right now, because what is coming next, what happens on Mount Misery Road after the rest of the world has gone to sleep, is the detail that will stay with you longest. Do not look away from the trees. There is a creature on Mount Misery Road that has no name that fits it comfortably. It has been reported by enough independent witnesses, described in enough consistent detail, and documented by enough serious investigators that dismissing it as folklore no longer feels entirely responsible. It walks the tree line at night. It is large. The witnesses who have come closest estimate somewhere between 6 and 8 feet when fully upright. It does not move like an animal. It does not move like a human. It moves like something that has studied both and reproduced them imperfectly, producing a gait that witnesses consistently describe as wrong before they can offer anything more specific. It has been seen moving on 4 legs and on 2, sometimes in the space of a single sighting, transitioning between both. The Black Dog of Misery is the version of this entity with the oldest documented history. It is described as a large black dog, sometimes a Labrador in form, sometimes something more massive and undefined, with eyes that glow red in the dark, not reflecting light the way an animal's eyes catch headlights, generating light, a red that comes from within. Every tradition that includes this creature agrees on one point. If you see the Black Dog of Misery, something terrible is coming, not to someone else, to you. The sighting is a marker, a warning, a declaration. People who have reported seeing the dog on Mount Misery Road have subsequently described periods of acute misfortune, accidents, illness, deaths of people close to them in the weeks and months that followed. Whether this is causation or coincidence is a question you can only answer by being willing to drive the road and find out for yourself. But the Black Dog is not the only non-human entity associated with this stretch of forest. Sweet Hollow Road, which intersects with Mount Misery at the crossroads that has accumulated more documented paranormal reports than perhaps any other point on Long Island, carries its own creature legend. A dog-like thing, but not a dog. Something that walks on its hind legs. Something that moves through the tree line at a height that no animal of that body plan should be capable of sustaining. Witnesses describe it emerging from the forest, crossing the road, and re-entering the trees on the other side, all in a movement that takes perhaps 4 or 5 seconds, and that leaves every witness who encounters it with the same overwhelming, wordless certainty that it knew they were watching and that it did not care. Then there is the phantom horse. It appears near the crossroads, galloping out of the tree line at full speed, its hooves making no sound on the asphalt, or making a sound so out of proportion to its apparent size that witnesses consistently mistake it for silence until they later compare notes. It runs. It is chased by nothing visible, or perhaps by something that moves just at the edge of what the human eye can track. It reaches the tree line on the opposite side and vanishes. Not slows, not turns, vanishes, mid-stride, as if the trees have swallowed it whole. Paranormal researchers who have attempted to follow the path of the horse into the woods have found no tracks, no broken undergrowth, no evidence of any large animal having passed through. The forest simply ends the horse's story and begins its own. There is a man who walks the woods of Mount Misery at night. He wears a checkered shirt. He moves between the trees with purpose, never appearing on the road itself, but visible from it, caught in headlights for a fraction of a second before the car passes the gap in the tree line and the darkness closes back. He carries an axe. Witnesses have described him as neither young nor old, neither running nor wandering, simply present in the woods with an ease and a deliberateness that suggests he belongs there in some way that living people do not. No one has approached him. No one who has reported seeing him had any desire to approach him. The feeling his presence generates is described not as fear exactly, but as a profound physical wrongness, the kind of wrongness that bypasses the rational mind and communicates directly with the body, producing a clarity of purpose that overrides every instinct except the most fundamental: leave. In 1976, a 13-year-old girl was beaten and strangled in the West Hills area. Her case remains unsolved. Her killer was never identified. She is one of those quiet tragedies that gets absorbed into a place's history, one more layer of real, documented human suffering added to a location that was already saturated with it. Some who have walked these woods after dark and heard what they describe as a child's voice calling out from somewhere among the trees, from no direction they could pinpoint, have wondered quietly whether she too has stayed, whether the unrevenged dead of this hill have chosen proximity over departure, drawn back to the site of their suffering by a gravity they cannot escape. It is worth pausing here and considering the full scope of what has been documented on and around this road. The lady in white, Mary, the patient who burned an asylum to ash and became the defining ghost of the West Hills. The children under the Northern State Parkway overpass pushing living cars to safety with small, cold hands. The police officer without the back of his head, still working his beat on a road that killed him. The black dog with the red eyes, marking you for misfortune. The phantom horse that vanishes into solid forest. The man with the axe who belongs to the dark more than to the living world. The shadow people, seen at the edge of what the eye can process, described by paranormal researchers as figures of pure darkness that do not merely stand in shadow, but appear to be composed of it. The UFOs that John Keel documented over these exact hills in 1967, the men in black who followed in their wake, the feeling of being observed from above and below simultaneously, the screams from a building that no longer exists, the smell of burning flesh that rises from the ground on still nights with no wind and no fire. Take all of that together, lay it across the geography of a single narrow road in a quiet Long Island suburb, a road whose very name was given to it by people who sensed its hostility before they had any vocabulary for the supernatural. These reports do not belong to a single era or a single cultural tradition. They span centuries. They span the entire range of human experience on this land, from the first indigenous warnings to the latest Instagram posts from teenagers who drove up on a dare and filmed something moving in the trees that they cannot explain. They are told by the young and the old, the credulous and the skeptical, the deliberately curious and the accidentally present. And then consider this: Mount Misery Road is open. Tonight, right now as you watch this, it is there. The trees are there. The crossroads is there. The overpass is there. The darkness is there. The specific, textured, watching darkness that every person who has driven this road at night has felt pressing against their windshield like something that wants in. People still drive it, not just teenagers on dares. Adults, investigators, people who have heard the stories and decide that curiosity is stronger than caution. Some of them come back with nothing. Some of them come back with photographs they cannot account for, recordings that contain sounds they cannot identify, and a persistent feeling that something followed them home. Something that does not announce itself immediately, but makes its presence known slowly over the days that follow, in the quality of the shadows in their house and the specific silence that falls in a room before something happens that they cannot explain. The road has a pattern that no one who has studied it seriously disputes. It takes things, and it keeps them. The patients burned in the asylum, the children from the bus, the teenagers from the overpass, the police officer without the back of his head, still working his beat on a road that killed him, the black dog with the red eyes, marking you for misfortune, the phantom horse that vanishes into solid forest, the man with the axe who belongs to the dark more than to the living world, the shadow people seen at the edge of what the eye can process, described by paranormal researchers as figures of pure darkness that do not merely stand in shadow, but appear to be composed of it. The UFOs that John Keel documented over these exact hills in 1967, the men in black who followed in their wake, the feeling of being observed from above and below simultaneously, the screams from a building that no longer exists, the smell of burning flesh that rises from the ground on still nights with no wind and no fire. Take all of that together, lay it across the geography of a single narrow road in a quiet Long Island suburb, a road whose very name was given to it by people who sensed its hostility before they had any vocabulary for the supernatural. These reports do not belong to a single era or a single cultural tradition. They span centuries. They span the entire range of human experience on this land, from the first indigenous warnings to the latest Instagram posts from teenagers who drove up on a dare and filmed something moving in the trees that they cannot explain. They are told by the young and the old, the credulous and the skeptical, the deliberate